Hey guys, we're in the bowels of the O2 Arena here in London. I'm going to see Jim Root later this afternoon before he performs with Slipknot tonight. So it should be a good one. Stay tuned. Here we are in the bowels of the O2 with Jim and Brad, his guitar tech. We're going to start by looking at some of the weaponry that you take with you when you're on tour. And interestingly, this year, or more recently, I feel like you've sort of gone down a sort of a more super stratty, hot roddy kind of vibe than you've been traditionally known for.
I'm a little bit obsessed by super strats. It's like I found my love for the guitars I was playing when I first started playing guitar, essentially.
I was about to say, that feels to me like the journey into adulthood normally goes, like you start with the pointy widdly stuff and then you go old school, but you've kind of gone a little bit old school and then back. So
there's something about having the playability of the super strat vibe, but the visual of like sort of the vintagey kind of thing. And that, I mean, that was the whole point with the Tele anyways, is to kind of like that juxtaposition of like modern and traditional, you know what I mean? And
so do every one of these get an outing on a typical night with Slipknot, or is this just some backup stuff here? Or
there's some backup stuff. We usually just have a different guitar for each little chunk of songs. Mm-hmm. So as many breaks as there are for a new guitar to be handed off, we do it. And I never send him out with the same one twice, just because he has such a great collection of guitars. Might as well use them, you know?
Lots of different tunings, or typically staying in the same tuning? Or?
Since this is a 25th anniversary of the first album tour, that whole record minus one song was all in the same tuning. So all of these are tuned identical. And then
this has made your life super easy then, right?
Yeah, it's very streamlined. It also makes it so like I can just swap guitars around. Like he never really knows what he's getting for the next song.
Oh, right.
I get surprised a lot, and it's kind of cool.
Which is kind of like our fun way to, certain things stay very, very consistent. And then obviously the setups and things like that are also consistent amongst each other, but it's kind of a fun way to mix it up. And, you know, you're playing a tour of the same set, same kind of things overnight. It's a good way to keep it exciting.
Can we take a look at one or two of the models that are in here?
Well, what's cool too is he did that last night. He surprised me. That Antigua signature Strat.
Yeah, we can check this out.
That usually is tuned to A, but since we're doing the 25th anniversary set, there's no A tuning, so he went ahead and set it up in B, and then he handed it to me last night, and I was like, ooh.
Do you even
I haven't seen this for a while, you know?
Maybe I'm still in A. Have I got a...
I usually give him just enough time to forget about a guitar before I bring it back in, then it feels like a new guitar.
Yeah.
But this is just one of his, standard signature Strats, just with a custom Antigua finish that Fender did. So.
It's a great finish.
I love it. It's such a love or hate thing. Some people just absolutely hate it. I love it. I think it's
great.
So cool.
Lean into it.
I mean, interestingly, I kind of feel like both you and mixed guitars end up being quite stripped back. Is that something that you have learned off each other over the time, or is that just something you've always done?
For me, it was like, you know, when I was in local bands and playing around town and doing club gigs and all that stuff, I just played whatever I had.
Yeah.
At that time, I was tuned to A440, so a Floyd wasn't a big deal, and somehow I got it in my head that having a Floyd would be a big deal for the drop tuning. So any Floyd guitar I had, I'd block the tremolo off and then just not even lock them down or anything. And then like in the past, 5 years or so, I started getting back into Floyds since that's what I learned on. And, you know, at home, I'd kind of mess around with them and set them up. And I'm like, oh, it's no different. It's just lower tuning is all. So, but you stretch them the same way, you get them to float the same way. And I'm just like, I had an old Jackson from like the Iowa days, and it was like the front pickup was torn out of it. The tremolo was blocked off. I'd like taken Sharpie and written shit all over it. And I cleaned it up real good. And I was like, here, make it new again. And Brad took it and put my pickup, got the tremolo working right. And now it's, you know, it started off being like, what do I really need to play a show? And then I started stripping things back to what it, you know, no tone knob. I don't use a tone knob. What do I need that for? No Floyd hardtail. I'm not using a lot of Floyd.
Yeah.
And then I slowly started kind of missing some of the things that I used to do when I was learning how to play guitar. That's why the Floyd came back, and I started using the Floyd more often. Tone knob, I'll probably still never come back with one of those. I'm not a blues player. I'm not messing with that all the time.
Can we see the Charbel?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. This is sort of a version of it because stock, it comes with, either an ebony board on the white model and then a maple board on the black model. But this, we just swapped the necks on.
Yeah, and the white ones usually have the white pickups in it too, but I really dig the zebra ones. So I think zebras just look classy. Like you can put them in almost any guitar and they look cool. Even if it's like a crazy 80s polka dotty, like stripy guitar, they still have a cool look about them.
Where were you? I mean, I think you and I are similar age, so I think we can still say we were probably slightly too young to have been around when, Wayne Charvel was doing the physical Strat mods. But is that what drew you to Charvel over the other, perhaps the sort of the Jacksons and the ESPs and stuff, is that it really is one of those heritage Strat became super Strat type
100%.
guitars?
I mean, they're the guitars, like my first real guitar was a Model 1 Charvel, with a hockey stick headstock, and, it was Ferrari red with a maple board, and I couldn't really believe it when I got it for Christmas. I was like mind blown, and there's just something so iconic about that, but there's something iconic about the traditional Fender headstock and the way Wayne was doing them back in the day, and it's just, I mean, I don't want any of that stuff to get lost to history. I mean, Wayne Charvel was extremely innovative, as well as Grover Jackson. I mean, they still make guitars to this day, which I've bought guitars from them.
It's crazy.
And they're incredible guitars, and to keep that name alive and that heritage going, I think it's really important.
So how does Jim want his guitars set then? What are you doing typically?
They're basically action as low as we can go for playing tension. I kind of set things up slightly different for stage or studio or for home, but it's kind of getting it as low as it'll resonate.
So home is like literally right across the top of the frets to where I can just get like a two-step bend out of it.
Got it.
And playing. But sometimes when I'm recording or in the studio, we got to bring it up.
Yeah.
So
Call it bedroom action. I'll be like, this one, bedroom action.
yeah.
And did you say you've locked the Floyd off, or you've
No, these are all
completely floating.
These
now?
are all functional.
He goes wild on all of them.
Yeah.
I was going to say, so, and how does that work then if you're doing some of that, very fast syncopated stuff? Are you still getting the string tension in there?
It's great because with the Floyd, I'm so used to the way my palm rests on it.
Yeah.
Like it's great for palm muting, and it's great for like just going wide open. It's comfortable because that's what I learned on, So a lot of dudes will do.
Is it sunk lower to a traditional Floyd into the body, or is that?
All standard.
This is just the way the angle of the neck pocket is, and his action. It just sits very flush.
And then he
with
sets
the
them
body.
up so that they float nice and flat. That way I can still pull up on it if I want, and get those dime bag,
I see for the Slipknot fans that's a low action, right? So that's a
low,
proper shredder's guitar.
yeah.
So what did it take you back to then when you were? Do you sort of embody different kinds of players when you pick this up as opposed to your Telecaster?
I try not to. It's hard not to kind of think that way. I think I read or listened to an interview with Matt Bellamy from Muse, and he was talking about the reason he uses the guitars he uses is because he picks up like another guitar, like a signature model or something that's famous for another guitar player's playing, and he plays like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's kind of relatable. I kind of get that. But at the same time, like, no matter how much I try to play like, say, Eddie Van Halen, I'm never going to play like Eddie Van Halen. So, just like Mick and I, when we hand each other's guitars, like, I sound like me through his rig and he sounds like him through my rig. It's crazy. But every once in a while he'll hand me one of his guitars and I'm just like, whoa, dude. And we'll like, do all that comparison stuff. But I think they're pretty unique to themselves. I mean, there's, honestly, this Charvel, if I had a chance to like redesign it, there's a few tweaks I'd like to make on it. But that's a story for another time.
But then that's the beauty, I think, of working with a brand like Charvel, and
they're so open-minded.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's like, well, what do you want? And off they go, and they make it.
And the other cool thing too is like, since I have like with the Fenders and the Teles, I had two different versions of each, so they're hot roddable, so to speak. So like like what we did with this guitar, we just swapped the necks on a white and black one, and you can do cool things.
Oh,
with
so
them.
that was. Oh no! Where have we got? So we don't have the sort of the other Charvel.
I don't have a black one.
I have
here.
the other one in our warm-up room.
In the warm-up room, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these guitars have got some serious scars on them. So have these been,
Yeah.
some of the Fenders here, been on the road with you for many, many years?
The main one is the #1 Tele, and that's all legitimate, like, road wear. I think most of the rest of them have been relicked.
Right,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whether by
Yeah.
the company or by this man here.
Yeah, but this is
So this is all real.
That's
is
all.
all
That's
natural.
all
Look at
road.
that.
Yeah, that's what the clip locks do after.
Right.
You know what? 15
Oh,
or
these
so
kind
years.
of straps. You see the
Yeah.
plastic bit just, wow.
But with time, even that is, you know,
Yeah,
a
and
really
it's
soft
getting-
contour.
Yeah, it's getting really smooth, and
Yeah.
you can see a little bit of like. It used to be like almost purple through here because when we were wearing the black coveralls and I'd sweat all over the guitar, it like kind of dyed it. But it looks like that's kind of wearing off even now. But look how shiny that mahogany's getting on the
Yeah.
edge there. It looks like it's lacquered almost. doesn't
See,
it?
I think that's what the artificial relicking never quite achieves. That because
Yeah.
when you get through to the wood, you've built so much dirt and sweat up on it over the years. It does go shiny like that. But look at that fretboard. That could be brand new, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just.
He's real good at what he does.
So are you.
And does it blow your mind that we're coming up to the 20th anniversary now of the Jim
Is
Root
it?
Telecaster?
Holy
I think it
crap.
was
I'm old.
2005
Oh, yeah.
when it came out,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
It's like. What,
Yeah.
what does the 15-year-old Jim Root sort of think about having a signature? Yeah, because I've seen
I
you
think
talk about this
I think the
guitar.
15-year-old Jim Root would be like, "The fuck are you doing with a Tele?"
With a Tele.
You know, man, already?
Exactly. Exactly.
Here's something cool about this guitar. So when they first sent me the prototypes, they sent them with the deluxe headstocks.
Okay.
So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but instead of like remaking the necks, they just cut this down to a standard Tele. That's why the R goes right to the
Right.
edge there, and it's kind of stubby.
Weird
Weird little,
Yeah, it's great.
weird little thing. Little fun fact.
Well, should we move over from the guitars now to some of the other things that make some noises? Because this is a bit controversial this year, isn't it, Mr.
It
Root?
is. Yes.
Have you had a lot of grief for this?
No, not really. I think everybody's pretty open to it. And honestly, it's a fucking tool. You know what I mean? Pardon my French.
Oh, it's fine.
But, you know, I mean...
I tell you what you won't do, because you won't say fuck as many times as Mick did in his interview. So you just carry on, man.
Yeah, I mean, they're tools. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to get back to a proper tube valve head.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't found one that beats it yet. And that's even... So the main IR that I'm using through the quad cortexes is an IR of a Bogner Helios Eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
And even that very same amp that we took the IR of, when you A/B them, the IR in the quad cortex is a little fuller, a little brighter. It has a little more shimmer to it. It's just that much better.
Interesting.
And it's mind blowing to me. So eventually we'll get back there because there's 2 or 3 amps that are out now that I've played at home that I absolutely love and I want to integrate into this system. And I've always been that way. Every time we do a record, I would end up building a new rack based on what I used in the studio.
So
And,
what is? Brad, take us through what's in the. What have we got?
So essentially, what we did, we did a capture of his Bogner Helios Eclipse. Did the dirty and the clean channel. So we have options to covering all our bases. And then we did IRs of each mic that we were using in the last version of the live rig through his cabinet. So it's very much a mirror of his last amp rig live setup. And then we use that as the building blocks, and then we can just customize and tweak everything to our content from there. Also, we had a full tray of 7 effects pedals, and now I'm kind of down to 2.
Oh wow! So that's literally the noise suppressor and whatever that. thing
Yeah,
is in
and
the
there's a
back.
built-in
Oh,
noise suppressor
right.
that's great as well, but this has sort of always been a mainstay.
Did you profile the pedals or just find stock ones in the?
Just
in
stock
the
ones,
QC?
yeah. I haven't done captures of the pedals. So many of them are time-based or modulation things.
Right, okay.
So, he's not like the only 2 overdrives that are in the rig are ones that he gets control of down front to play. But everything else I control back here during the show. So while he plays, I'll be switching. The auto cue is the only pedal that I still need standalone at this moment. Who knows? This could all change tomorrow, and we kind of have an open flow of things. But
What are you hearing still on stage? Are you all full in here, or have you got some cabs
No,
on
I
stage?
use wedges. There's no
Okay.
cabs. So even if I do go back to a head or a preamp power up situation, I'll probably use like a 2 notes or some sort of speaker sim just for our front of house guy. So it's easier for him.
Does that give you the?
By the time I hear what's coming out of the wedges,
Yeah.
even if I was on an amp, you're going through a board
Yeah.
whatever types of EQ is going through there and compression and whatever else that adds to it, especially if it's a mic cab. It's so processed by the time I hear it
Yeah.
that it's not what you would hear coming right out of the 412 in front of you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's one way in my mind that I justify all this.
How are you finding, unless mix rig has changed as well, how are you finding you with a digital solution? Is Mick still doing the Amiga?
He's
thing?
doing the Amiga. They're doing a preamp power amp setup with I think they're using that 2 Notes
Yeah.
speaker
Use
sound
it
thing
2 Notes
too.
Opus, yeah.
And that works really well for him. He's lucky enough to have the owner of the company as his tech.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
So he's still hearing his sound through a wedge. Though.
yeah.
Right.
I believe, Mick has in-ears, but I don't think he uses them. I think he uses a wedge too, because they got whenever we switch sides on stage, they flip our mixes. You
Right,
know what I
of
mean?
course.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's, I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, this in context with everything else that's going on that stage, I don't really feel. The feel was the biggest thing when I very first tried to use, a digital processing like amp sim on stage. It wasn't necessarily the sound that bothered me so much. It was the way it felt and the response. But I'm not missing any of that with the Quad Cortex. I'm still getting like sustainable feedback. I can still let things ring out. There's still the somewhat natural things that are happening with it. And I don't want to say it's an unnatural thing. I mean, it's, whatever. It's composites made from the earth.
Sure.
Whatever, you know what I mean? I mean, in context, by the time I'm hearing it, with Eloy, the drum mix, and V-Man with the bass, and, Sid and mystery guy over here, we just, everything together, it's like, it blends so well.
Yeah.
And then Mick and I, we try to like he goes for what he wants as a sound, and then I go for whatever can complement that.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So
I was going to talk about that maybe a bit more when we just
we can,
that
and
dynamic
we can do that.
of
We can do
the
that,
two
but
guitar player band.
That's one of the sort of cool things, but it's also sort of a downfall of being in a 2 guitar player band is you got to kind of, to avoid having like frequency masking or 2 guitars that sound exactly the same type of thing. It's better if they're kind of off from each other. So you kind of sacrifice having what you would normally want as your actual tone.
Yeah.
But you would have to do that anyways in a situation like this with this many guys in a band. You got to have things that cut through a mix. You got to have things that take up, and guitars are meant to sit in a certain frequency range, like remember when we first started touring and all that, the big thing was like the sub cabinets and everybody's playing 7 strings and, well, now you're getting guitars down into the bass where the bass should take up that real estate. And then you end up with like Korn where Fieldy's bass tone's really clicky. And it's like, well, what else is he supposed to do? Like guitars are taking up all those bass frequencies. So in order for the bass to cut through it, probably got to push a lot of mids and highs, you know what I mean? So
That's that concept of serving the song, but serving the sound and serving the mix.
Presumably as a tech, you're loving this, right? Or just
I'm up for anything.
Really?
I love all of it. I love amps. I love digital solutions. It's just what works. Like if it feels good for him and he likes the sound, and also really important is how front of house feels about it.
Well, front of house definitely prefer this kind of thing.
yeah,
don't they?
for
Well,
sure.
I mean, front house is also he's real into analog tube amps.
Okay.
He builds amps himself
Builds
as
amps
well.
too. Yeah,
So,
this is a good example of like tube amp and vintage gear enthusiasts that are in a modern world and how they're dealing with it. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
the therapy sessions and things like that they have to go through. No, but I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a tool and it's a job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
I was interested as to whether or not any of the studio kind of elements of what you're doing might go down this route, or if you're still going to stay with a traditional setup.
I would say, so I have a Quad Cortex at home next to my Pro Tools rig, and that's what I'm using. I was just using plugins, there again, it's a tool. If there happens to be an effect that I can't replicate that's in the Quad Cortex, that may make a record, but I can't see myself actually using a Quad Cortex to record a record with. Not when we've got so many amps available that have so many different, and sometimes when you record an album, I might use 4 different amplifiers on a record, so I'm not saying that this can't do it, but I can tell the difference between an analog recorded tube amplifier and a processed simulator like this. You know what I mean?
It's the context, right? In the context of the live thing, you can't. it's gone, isn't it, in amongst
Yeah.
it? But when it's the purity of
When it's
the
captured on
recording,
tape and you're
Yeah.
under that microscope,
Yeah.
it's very important to have that natural
Yeah.
analog feel. And I even transferring from tape, to
Yeah.
like Pro Tools and Logic and things like that was kind of weird for me, because you can tell it sounds when it starts sounding so clean and so polished and so edited, it tends to sound really unnatural for me. And as much nature as we can keep in it, to me, that's very important. Like, think about Funk 49, Joe Walsh. There's a part in the end of that song that where he rushes one, and they fucking leave it in. You know what I mean? And it's great. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And half the time I didn't even notice that until like I was in my 30s, and I'd been listening to that song as a kid with my parents forever, and then all of a sudden I'm like, it's like that Leonardo DiCaprio. They like, you hear that? He just
touch.
rushed that part,
Yeah.
And those Zeppelin, all over Zeppelin records, all those old records, you can hear these little imperfections, but they're very pleasing to the ear,
Yes.
and there's a reason they left them in.
I think there's a whole debate about are the imperfections what makes the older music so fucking great.
I think so.
And the strive for perfection now removes some magic.
When I listen to some modern metal, it's hard for me to like really wrap my head around a lot of modern metal music because it's so edited perfectly. And if you're a math metal guy, like if you're into prog, it's probably amazing for you. But for me, it's just like, I know that they're in the studio and they're cutting that waveform right to where the drum beat is, and they're lining it up perfectly. And that's great that we have those tools to be able to do that. And for people that are into that, it's cool, but that's just not really my vibe,
What else have we got here, Brad? Anything else? What's the most stressful thing that happens in the middle of a Slipknot gig for you?
It's been chill.
You're
It's been
so
really chill.
relaxed.
I feel like,
Even
know.
when we lost this pedal the other day.
oh yeah, he came back. We had an issue. This is like a prototype pedal we've been
As
working
in
on.
physically lost it, or it just stopped working?
No, I probably kicked it off of the lock or something, you know what I mean?
But signal
So-
cut out for a second. But
Mid song.
Yeah.
sure,
Right.
So I try to make sure I have a plan for everything. So I have that in a special loop. So I just click that out of the loop, and then the next song, he came back. He uses this board a lot for that next song.
Yeah.
So he came back and he's like, "What am I gonna do?" And I was like, I pulled up I have an identical build of this. So I just pulled that up. I'm like, I'm gonna put this out. And he's like, oh.
Oh yeah, we're like NASA. We have redundancies.
Yeah, he's like, oh, okay. So
Oh
I don't know.
man! So this is a custom-made thing, is it for you?
Yes, this
That's
is
something fun we're playing around with.
yeah.
Ah, I
And
see,
I've actually
top
been
secret.
using it quite a lot.
Yeah.
This tour and the previous tour. They made it for me a few years ago, and I kind of like hadn't gotten to it. And then Brad put it on the pedal board and kind of forced me to get to it.
Yeah, this is our second revision that we got a couple months ago. So yeah, just kind of no way better to road test things than to put it in,
them on the road.
And Jim's up for that stuff, which is great. But
We're not
we
going to
can-
get anything out of you, are we, about what it is, who makes it, or anything, are we?
I mean, I think you can kind of get an idea by looking at it.
Oh, you say that? I don't know. Well, there you go. Comment section.
That's up to you if you want the mystery or what. But
You tell me off camera just so I can order some.
sure.
Oh, well,
I mean,
that's,
all you got to do is look at who most of my gear is brought to me by, and you get an idea who's making fun stuff for me.
fair enough. Fair enough. That's a pretty
You know,
simple.
I get a lot of pedals from a lot
Yeah.
of companies, and
Yeah.
people tend to.
Yeah. Yeah, this is simple. This is just sort of him to have some control of playing around with stuff.
Is it one of George's, or is it more as in? Look at that. They're not saying anything. Probably edit this bit out. Well, it's very cool to see you using such a simple board, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's just part of the equation. I got to have something out front to.
Yeah.
And then we've got the satellite wahs, the the custom.
Yeah, so these are controllers for the Dunlop rack wah.
Right. Yeah.
That is like set to all our custom settings. And then there's like parts for some of these pedals to get in use. Like if he doesn't turn one on in certain songs, I'm kind of like, oh, he's doing something different. But also there's times where he just like wants to mess around and wants to do something different and improvise. But the meat and potatoes of things I control through here with different patches
Yeah,
and
all the
different
major
sounds.
like switching in the songs, like if we go from clean to dirty, or
Yeah.
if there's like a chorus lift or anything like that.
Yeah.
Brad's doing all that back here.
I'm not. That's the only thing I've never even heard of. What's
Yeah,
the
so with
what's the
this
head
rig,
first?
sort of the impetus for building this was just an experiment to see what we could do with different sizes and different mediums kind of help for shipping in an increasingly costly world for shipping, or things like that, if it was even a viable option to go a digital realm. So I toured with this in parallel with his amp rig for a few months, just to see if it was even a contender, and front of house would record it. But tone was always like the paramount thing. Like, we didn't want to do a more cost-efficient option to ship or something like that to sacrifice tone. It was really just a test of like, all right, how does this hold up? Is it viable?
But I've never heard of this.
So this is
Alto
Head
P.
First. This guy Jason Tong in Australia, who is a
So
company
just a
Head
guitar
First.
preamp or something.
Yeah, so Jim was using the
That's a
Alta
secret, too.
100. Yeah, this is also sort of a prototype thing.
Okay.
He was using an Alta 100 full, 100-watt head in the last iteration of the tube amp rack. So in integration with this, we also have a patch where we'll do a modeled, or a captured, I guess, preamp, or sorry, power amp, and then we run this tube preamp into it.
So you're running that as one of the blocks, an effects loop essentially.
So we kind of,
blocks.
that's our constant experimentation of
Yeah.
wanting to beat what we've got. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but I think it's always nice to kind of chase the dragon a little bit and see if you can do better.
All right, man. Well, look, thank you very much for this little behind-the-scenes bit. Are we okay to just perhaps grab the new Charbel and go into the
let's do it.
little room? Thanks, man. So we are in
Narnia.
We're in Narnia.
We're in the library.
Absolutely. Allegedly, the room behind us was custom built for Michael Jackson before his
OMG.
ill-fated last tour that didn't happen. But hey, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, it's a whole different weird thing. Can you imagine being the type of artist that could just have a venue like make a room for you? That's kind of mind-blowing to me.
Wasn't he able to like just say to Disney, I want to come to Disney, and they would just shut Disney for him?
That's so
That's
bananas.
just another level, isn't it?
Imagine if you're the family that like scheduled a vacation of that particular weekend, and it was the only time off you had for like 5 years.
Anywho.
Anyways.
Well, it was cool seeing your rig and meeting Brad and stuff like that. But I'm always interested, I think especially with artists like yourself who I think have to some degree sort of pioneered the style of music that the band has, that Slipknot plays. I'm always interested to sort of go back and understand how you've grown up listening to guitar players who would never have played that style of music because the style of music didn't exist.
Right.
Where did those early influences come from, and what were those magical moments along the way that created the style that you play that then enabled Slipknot to make the music that they make?
I think it's still an evolving thing, and it kind of came out of, like, everybody in the band has such different musical tastes, but it's all kind of based around metal. Like when we were in local bands, like we were all essentially playing metal music or like alternative. Like Clown was in a band called Heads on the Wall that was more like a Jane's Addiction type of vibe, you know what I mean? But still heavy at the end of the day, I mean, Navarro's guitar tones were always heavy back then, and that type of thing. But most of the rest of us, like Mick, like death metal, like hardcore, Morbid Angel, bands like that, and I was more of like thrash metal, and then, Joe as a drummer could play everything from funk and blues style stuff to just in your face speed and thrash metal, like, and I think it was just when you bring all these different kind of styles together, you end up with with us, what ends up being Slipknot. And we're still trying to like for me, I'm still trying to write music that's like the music that I listened to growing up. And that in itself was an evolution, because I mean, I was obviously turned on to music by my parents and their record collection, which was essentially classic rock, which was, Cream, The Doors, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, that whole thing, Beatles, whatever. And then when I started developing my own musical tastes and being a rebellious teenager, it was metal, because I wanted to play guitar, and what showcased guitar more than, bands like Megadeth and Anthrax and Metallica and, the Big Four or whatever, Exodus, Violence, all that type of stuff. And then, but I still, like, even to this day, if I'm going to put like my Spotify on shuffle, it tends to be like like 70s classic rock based stuff and even into like some disco and stuff like that, or even 80s pop music, like the Knack or stuff like that. So the song is what I'm most interested in. And as I've, aged and gotten older and all that stuff, it's more about the song and playing for the song rather than seeing how many riffs I can fit into it. Because that used to be the thing. Like that's kind of how Slipknot got its sound, is we got to make the most intense thing that we can do, even if it's a simple song like, say, Surfacing. There's 2 fun guitar riffs in that song, other than the middle part, the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. But still, do-do-do-do-do-do with all down picking, that's like, we got to be intense and fast and da-da-da-da and all that, And so there was that level of like just trying to outdo not just each other in the band, but all the other bands around, and that kind of created this cacophony of noise that we put out.
Are you when you're writing, are you very like solidly a riff player, or are you sort of constructing songs more sort of with more perhaps a theoretical approach?
I'm still trying to figure that out. I think that's the eternal, because writing, there's no rule book. You can do it however it comes to you, whether it's like noodling around on the couch and then something comes to you, or it's sitting in front of the Pro Tools rig, or if it's at a band rehearsal and then the drummer plays something and then you just happen to play something along with it and somebody's like, what was that? You know what I mean? And then it can evolve into a song, and it can either be a situation where a song, like, you hear a lot of people say a song will write itself, and sometimes that happens, and when it does happen, those tend to be the really good ones. Or it could be a song that you just work on for years and it just stays in demo form, and then you just keep revisiting it, and maybe a year after you started working on it, you hear it differently and you're like, oh, wait a minute, and then all of a sudden something unlocks and then it comes together, better that way. That's why I think a lot of the times, in the movie industry, they say they never finish a movie, they abandon it. And I think that rings true with what we do too in the studio. It's like, how deep in do you want to go, or can you go? And you could infinitely work on things until you could drive yourself crazy and end up cutting your ear off or whatever. You know what I mean? It's hard.
Even with, so you're a believer in that, no such thing as a perfect song. Just you stop at some point.
At some point, you just stop.
Put it out there.
Yeah. And when we were working on "We Are Not Your Kind," that was kind of like the deepest we were able to go into a record. I mean, I started working on that record a couple of years before we even got together to do pre-production for it. And, we had so many songs that it got to the point where, sitting with Clown and Corey and Fiddleman, just trying to figure out, like, which ones are we cutting? Because, the money's cutting off at this time and the studio time's cutting off at this time, and there's a deadline and there's a schedule and there's a budget, and you've got these 5 extra songs that we need to figure out which ones we're focusing on. And it's like, Jesus, how do we figure this out?
Was it easier then? I love that, because you're sort of going, so in the early days of the band, the money runs out faster, right? So, but does that shorter opportunity to make stuff happen, does that inspire greater creativity, or do you prefer the freedom to go longer? What do you think brings the best out of the band?
That's hard to say, because we haven't had a chance to do either enough times to figure it out. You know what I mean? It's like, how many times are you going to make a record in your life and in your career?
Yeah.
I mean, you're playing shows constantly. You might do hundreds or thousands of shows, but you're only going to be in a studio 6 or 7 times in your career.
Right.
10 times maybe, depending on how long your career is. Some people twice. So that's like one of those things where it's like, there's always going to be a learning curve. But I think we work really well under pressure.
Right.
In some cases, in most cases. There are exceptions to that rule, of course. But I think if we know there's a clock ticking over our heads, it'll inspire us to really like dig down in deep and find what it is we're looking for,
You mentioned whilst we were doing the rig rundown, and it was a question I was, coming up over the last couple of days, listening to a lot of your back catalogue, going, how are you got 2 very talented guitar players in that band. There must be some sense as you're constructing songs that you've got to complement each other. It can't be a competition.
Yeah.
Is that, and it sounded like you very much take it as your role to embellish what Mick's going to play, or is that?
It depends on the song, I mean, there's some songs where if I'm at home, well, it depends on the song, the writing process, whether it's something that I came up with at home, whether it's a band situation. or whether it's like one of those things where somebody hears something and then we start working on it off of that. But if I'm at home, and the only reason I'm talking about this is because it's what I'm most familiar with, I always write thinking about what not just Mick is going to be doing, but what, Clown or Foff or any of the other guys are going to be doing. And I always think about leaving space. The only question is, what's Corey going to do? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So if I write a 4 or 5 minute long arrangement and I've got it set up so like there's an intro and then there's a verse line and then like a pre-chorus and a chorus and then like a middle 8 section or a breakdown and then it all repeats or whatever, I might give it to him and he might want to sing a chorus over what I thought was a verse, mm-hmm. or he might like take this little pre-chorus section and want that to be the verse. So, I have to be real free with what I write so that, I don't get married to how it is in my head. That way we can, I'll send it off to Corey first and see if, and sometimes he'll just write over what I give him and we won't change anything. And other times it's that evolution, we'll give it back, and then as far as guitar parts, like I'll always do a left and right guitar track, and even in the studio, Mick and I will do like hard left and right tracks, but there might be songs where he, like if it happens to be a song that I wrote at home, he might want to like be like, that rhythm's really cool, but I have this idea and I'm going to play this. Mm-hmm. And that's great because it's like, it takes, adds a whole another new dimension to the song that I wouldn't have thought of.
Right.
Which is great when you're, when you become so attached to something and you're so in your head with it, you can't look at it objectively, mm-hmm. but you give it to somebody like Mick and he hears it from a totally different standpoint and a different style of playing even, and he does something that wouldn't even occur to me, and then all of a sudden that's the thing that takes the song and lifts it to where it needs to be, And
that's the band magic as opposed to just the solo creator, 100%. Isn't it? Just where... and I have to say again, I was listening, I suppose Slipknot was never a band that I would have naturally gravitated to. Being young, I was way more sort of probably a blues rock, classic rock kind of thing. Yeah. But I must admit that the band's ability, and I suppose, helps a lot with the way Corey sings it, to be able to break songs in 1 minute he's singing like an angel and the band is playing this almost orchestral sort of beautiful piece into just fucking hard rock kill, and it's like it's really dynamic and interesting to listen to.
It's really important not to put limits on what you can do creatively, like being genreified, I guess, for lack of a better term. A lot of like purists and pure metalheads don't like that idea, and a lot of people will say we're not a metal band, and I wouldn't disagree with them. I mean, when you listen to some of the like Norwegian death metal or some of the early stuff, late 80s, early 90s stuff, it's like, we're definitely not that heavy.
It's not relentless, is it?
But what's your definition of heavy too? Like, does that mean fast and like machine gun picking, or does that mean like really slow, sludgy in the mud, like halftime feel stuff? I mean, it's, I don't know. I haven't really cracked that code either, but.
Well, I think you need the light and the shade, and I think you deliver that like it's phenomenally well.
Well, I think, and I've heard, I did a podcast a while back over here, and the guy was like, well, you're kind of really a pop band, aren't you? And I couldn't disagree with that either, because like for me, pop and classic rock and some of the simple arrangements are the ones that have the most impact, and mean more, and also let the vocals do what they need to do. And let's face it, most people aren't singing the guitar lines or a drum line or a key line or whatever it is. People are singing the vocal melodies. So you really have to like write for that guy,
It's the hooks and the melodies at the end of the day that
100%.
20 years down the line, the songs that are played on the radio from 20 years, it's all the ones that had the great hooks and the great melodies, So I want to talk, I mean, look, we must talk about this guitar, and interesting watching you picking away there. Let's even do the plectrum story. We had this.
All right.
we had this like Jim was like, anybody got any plectrums in here? I was just like, I got this shitty one, and
here's an Anderton.
Exactly. I'm going to leave that with you. But tell us, what is your whole approach to, the way you're playing the guitar? Obviously you got fearsome kind of right hand sort of stuff. But what? And again, what is it about this guitar that you think is enabling your playing to progress in the way you want it to progress?
I mean, that's a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, it could be anything. It could be familiarity with the fact that that's what I grew up learning to play on. It could be the way the guitars are just built, you know, compound fretboard radiuses, that whole thing, the super Strat vibe, you know, this other guitar players that have played that similar type of guitar and the music that they played. I think for me, I can overthink everything until I'm just absolutely insane about it. So I try not to overthink as much as I can.
Yeah.
And I'm not a very well-disciplined guitar player. I like if I don't gravitate to something and I can't pick it up like very easily without having to put a lot of work into it, I lose interest. I don't know if that's ADHD or whatever. But if it doesn't come naturally to me, then I'm just like,
Yeah.
same thing with writing or anything. So if I sit down, and that's why my discipline is so bad, like I'll be cruising through my Explore feed and I'll see somebody playing like some crazy guitar thing and I'm like, oh, I'm going to learn that. And then I sit down and if it's not coming right to me, then I'm like, fuck that. And then I just go back to the same thing, you know, same thing I always fucking play, you know, so.
Isn't that interesting? Because I had a similar, my attention span is short. I don't know if it's ADHD wasn't even a thing when I was growing up or whatever.
Yeah.
So I never managed to look, you know, I could never break down one of your songs and learn it note for note because I wouldn't have the attention span to be able to do it. So does that still?
I think when I was younger, I had the attention span for it because I would break. I mean, there was no such thing as like, unless they tabbed it out in the back of like a Guitar Player or a Guitar World magazine, you couldn't watch a YouTube tutorial on anything. So I was sitting with, you know, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good and play, rewind, and tuning to the tape, you know what I mean? Not to a tuner, but to the album or whatever. And then trying to figure out what's that part? What's that bit he's doing? And then when you figure it out, it's like an accomplishment. It's like, you know, unlocked score, you know what I mean, type of thing. And that in itself is inspiring.
Yeah.
And now you can just, you know, you can type in like, you know, Skull Beneath the Skin or whatever song it is you want to learn, and then there's some dude that's playing it perfectly and he's got it tabbed out and
half speed and
and there are apps for that now too, you know, where you can play things where they maintain, you know, the pitch but it's half speed, so you can really work out and you can solo certain instruments. It's bananas. We've had to do that with some of our own songs just to relearn them.
Do you have to be very what's the right word? The minute I pick up a guitar with a Floyd Rose on it, I overuse. You know, it's like, it's my new toy. And then I watch videos back of myself playing, and I just think, man, you use that. So it's like, so much, it's inappropriate. But is there anything about the new guitar where you've had to go, it's so much fun, but I've got to not?
I haven't pulled myself back yet. I just have fun with it.
Really?
Yeah, and I'd probably go a little bit too bananas with it, but it's there. Why not use it? You know what I mean? And that's how I was, like, you know, in the speed metal bands that I was in, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s. When I first started, all my guitars had Floyds on them. Yeah. So there was always the dive bomb, you know, in between the chorus and the verse, or at the beginning of a solo or the end of a solo or whatever, you know, that whole dime bag kind of vibe thing.
I was going to ask you, who's your favorite? Who's your favorite Floyd Rose kind of guy? Would it be
Eddie, probably. Yeah. Eddie or Dimebag. I mean, the stuff Steve Vai does with a tremolo is absolutely wacky, you know? I mean, there's so many out there that do so many. Even dudes that aren't using Floyds, like I watch some of the, like Yngwie and what he can do with like a regular Fulcrum Fender, you know, Jeff Beck, all those guys. I mean, they're going crazy with these things that wouldn't even be able to keep that in tune if I went that far with a bridge like that, you know.
What are the similarities between this and the Fender? Have you stayed with the same pickups, or have you done some new design pickups?
This guitar has my new EMGs in it. I don't think they're putting those in the Fenders. I went ahead and went with a Floyd because that's what I grew up with. And I missed having it, and you know, I shied away from that with the lower tuning and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we talked about that a little bit when we were up with the gear. But you know, I wanted to have that same feeling, you know, that same palm muting and open, you know, just the versatility of having that feel there, because it feels way different than a hardtail bridge or any other kind of, you know, like a Kahler or any of those other bridges. And it just feels so natural, you know, and it's, you know, like there's places you can grab a hold of it. I can rest my pinky back here, and you know, like there's all these different crazy things that I can, like sometimes I find myself running my pinky back here and like, you know, just ever so slightly giving it a little vibrato while I'm picking too. And of course there's the dimes, you can do that and you get all the fluttery stuff out of it. They're just fun. You know?
Did you at some point in your do you think just the way you play doesn't naturally break strings on guitar? So I mean, when was the last time you broke a string in anger?
I don't remember the last time I broke a string. It's been a long time.
So that's a good thing.
I mean, I can go absolutely batshit crazy with this tremolo and probably not break a string. I'd have to try really hard to break a string.
Do you think you're gonna? Now you said that you've swapped the neck, so out of the catalog, the white one will have the ebony board and the black one will have the maple board.
Yeah, that's what I like, that hot roddable kind of aspect of it. You know, not just the Charvels, but the Fenders too. Like you can oh, that's got a rosewood neck and that's got a maple neck. I'm just gonna fucking swap them. You know what I mean? And there you go.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and do you think as you seem to be playing the white one a lot? Is the white one the one everyone says guitars kind of find you rather than the other way around? Do you think that one's speaking to you in a certain way? Is it?
It has been, and you can see, you know, it's getting kind of worn in. It's starting to look like my #1 Tele a little bit. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, maybe it's the chemical molecule content of white paint or something, but they tend to they pop on stage, they tend to sound a little better, and I just think they look kind of, they got an element of class to them, maybe, you know, something. It's like wearing a tuxedo or something.
I was going to say I quite like that sort of monochrome angle of it. Just it does look super smart. We're going to probably wrap this up because I know you guys have got gigs to do.
Oh, we do.
But you mentioned before, so are you going through an obsessive phase at the moment with things like, you know, picks and cables and, you know, what shoes do you wear while you're doing this? Or are you feeling pretty loose and happy, which is just...
I think I'm kind of loose and happy with it. Luckily, I've got, you know, a really good Brad Clifford that helps me with everything, and I don't have to worry about any of that other shit. I just, you know, whatever he hands me, I'll go out and play, and he'll surprise me, and I don't really need to think too hard about because I mean, we've had those tours where should I be using the Flow 1.14s or the Tortex 3 and a 1.5, or, you know, and then it's like I'll go out and I'll be like, oh, it's getting hung up, I need a 73 Flow, or, you know what I mean, and you drive yourself crazy thinking about all that stuff, and it's like, this pick you gave me, I'll start the show with it tonight, you know what I mean?
That'd be amazing, man. Well, look, honestly, it's been such a pleasure. I have to say, you know, for a sort of, I say it to most of the guests that I meet, but you know, the passion that you still have for your, you know, for the gear. You know, I always think to myself, well, if I'd been a pro guitar player, successful pro guitar player for 25, 30 years, would I just become blasé about it all? Is it just like, yeah, whatever? But you haven't, you know, Mick hasn't, many of the guests that I have, you're still as into it now as, like, I reckon if I'd have had a conversation with the 15-year-old Jim, it would have been pretty similar.
Pretty similar, yeah.
You know, we'd have talked about what you love about it and the guitar players you love. And that's amazing, man. And I hope that never, changes.
We are extremely lucky to be able to do what it is we do, and we're extremely grateful, and our work ethic, you know, sometimes shows that and sometimes doesn't. You know, there's ebbs and flows to everything, and there's ups and downs, but you know, our absolute worst days on tour are probably better than most people's days in the office, so got to kind of keep that in, you know, perspective.
Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure, man, and thank you very much to Charvel as well for hooking us up. So thank you. That's amazing. Well, look,
cheers, man.
I hope you have a great gig tonight. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you didn't see the one that I did with Mick Thompson from just after about 4 years ago, links will be below. And that's it. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.